Hey everybody, welcome to the OPEX podcast. I'm Jim Crowell. I don't usually do these, but this was a really fun one that we're working on a really big partnership with Precision Nutrition, and so we wanted to bring a couple of folks on, and so I get the privilege of interviewing Brian St. Pierre. And so Brian, welcome to the show. We really appreciate you joining us today. And would you just give people just a little bit of background for some context as to how you got to Precision, maybe some of the experiences you had before and what you do now for them?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. I always appreciate coming on and doing podcasts, and it's always a cool opportunity to share ideas and just have a cool conversation. In terms of, how I got here and what I did before PN, so I've been at PN for a little over 7 years, almost seven and a half years now. So quite a while. Prior to that, I started my career at Cressy Sports Performance when it was just Cressy Performance. And it was it was a little tiny corner of a batting cage facility in a rundown mill in Hudson, Massachusetts. Right? First time I started working there, we didn't even have power racks.
Nice.
Right. So I was there the day they arrived, and we put them together without instructions. Right. Me and Pete Dupuis were looking at a picture on his computer, and we go back into the gym, and it took us 3 tries to get it right the first time. Then after that, we banged them out. So yeah, I worked there for about 3 years. I was a strength and conditioning coach. I was the head nutritionist there. So then I went back to school for my master's and to be a dietitian while still coaching people online. And then fortunately enough, like I had been following JB and Precision Nutrition since undergrad. So 20 years ago. And they put out a post or a newsletter email saying they were looking to hire. And once I had gone back to school and left Cressy Performance, I was like, my plan was to start my own gym, basically do what Eric was doing, just on a smaller scale in Maine, right? I'd always told him that from the get-go. We're both from Maine. That was my plan, to always go back to Maine. And then this cool opportunity came along to apply to work for JB, who was one of the first people who inspired me to get into the field, right? I spent my first 3 years in college as an engineering major, hating every minute of it, and spending a lot more time reading about training and nutrition than doing my engineering work. And so this opportunity came, and I thought, well, hell, I'll apply. If I don't get it, I'll do what I was going to do anyway. But it'd be pretty cool to work for JB and PN. So yeah, I applied, and I was fortunate enough, out of the 300 people that applied, I was fortunate enough to get the position, and I've been there ever since. And I've worn a lot of different hats at PN. I've been a coach. I've been a manager of coaches. I write for the site. I speak on behalf of PN. I do a lot of our media work, podcasts, and work with journalists. I do a lot of our curriculum work. So we have a brand new 4th edition of our certification that just launched right now. So Krista Scott Dixon and I and everyone else on the team, we put a ton of work into that. We think it's awesome. We think it's the best certification out there. So yeah, I do a lot of different things, wear a lot of different hats. I've worked in all different areas of the company, from the coaching end to the certification end, because I have experience in all those realms, to the writing and presenting end. So I'm one of the few people left, I think, me and Krista and a few others who were around, and we were like a little small startup that all wore different, lots of different hats. And now we're big enough when we hire new people, they come in and they have one role, right? One job. And that's just not how it was when I started, right? You had to do a whole bunch of different things. So
exactly,
I still do a whole lot of different things for better and for worse, but yeah, it's going well.
I love that. So if you had to pick the thing that you'd love to spend your time doing as it relates to PN, what would you pick?
Ooh, in many ways, I would say I love working with other fitness professionals to talk about coaching. I think I like coaching other coaches on how to do coaching, right? If that follows. I really like interacting with fitness pros and speaking at events. I hate the travel. I hate traveling to events.
Yeah.
But I love presenting, talking, sharing ideas, having conversations, problem solving together, and really helping fitness professionals up their coaching game. Apply what we know about the nutrition science, and then combine that with the art of coaching. And so that's really, I think, what I love to do. It's where I've been focusing more of my attention at PN over the last probably 6 months to a year. I'm removing myself from like being directly involved in all of our PN coaching, like working with clients. For a long time, I've managed all of our coaches, and so it's beginning getting too big for me to juggle both ends. So I'm moving much more into out of there, still involved in the curriculum aspect of it, like what we teach and how we teach it, but much more involved with the certification and coaching coaches. So that's my love.
Yeah. Oh man, I know that feeling. I do a lot of that on the business end with other fitness professionals, and just love being on the phone with those men and women. So let me ask you this. I don't get enough of these opportunities to talk to specialists kind of outside of where my focus is on the business side. What do you find are some of the biggest challenges that these fitness professionals have when it comes to implementing a nutrition plan or behavior training with people?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a couple different things come to mind when it comes to the biggest challenges. One thing I see a lot of fitness professionals do is try to have their clients like eat how they eat. Like,
Mm.
like I do all these advanced concepts. I did the same thing when I was an early coach in my career because, I had done all these progressions and, worked on my nutrition for years
Yep.
and did all kinds of crazy stuff, man. Like ate 8 times a day and all this nutrient timing and all of these fancy strategies that helped me get where I got. I won't deny that, right? But didn't turn around and realize or forgot that most of my clients were starting at the beginning of that path, right? Like I had
Mm.
walked really far down that path, right, in all kinds of directions. And then you want to take your client from the beginning, boop, and plop them all the way right where you are.
Hmm.
And one, it's not possible because they don't have any of the underlying skills and systems and structures that you've built to make that possible. And two, it's not usually not necessary for a lot of those clients, right? Because you did all those things so that you could have a six pack and be incredibly fit and strong because you're into fitness and training, like as I was, right? As any of us in this field usually are. But most of our clients, like that's not their thing, right? They're coming to train with you to be a little fitter and healthier and do the things they love to do.
I
So,
often have this conversation with our coaches because we go down the rabbit hole deeply with coaches on program design and designing these immaculate fitness programs. And I tell them, we get into these live courses. I go, you guys got to realize that nobody else gives a shit about program design,
right,
and it's like, hey, don't take it personally, but it's a strategy that you just have to recognize people aren't at the same place.
right, right.
That's such a cool point. So kind of stemming off of that, how complex do you think coaches need to make nutrition for people?
In general, well, I mean, I guess there's a couple different answers, right? The answer is almost always it depends,
Right.
but it,
Yeah.
but it depends on some specific criteria, right? So we classify clients as like level one, level two, or level three eaters. So level three would be like someone getting paid for their physical appearance, right? They're stepping on stage in their underwear, or they're a model, or they're an athlete prepping for a scene in a movie. An actor or an actress prepping for a scene in a movie, or just prepping for a movie. Even a weight class athlete, right? Just for that short period of time was trying to make weight. That's where nutrition needs to be complicated because you're trying to get to some like crazy, either specific body weight or really specific body composition. Then you back up from there and you get to what we call like a level two eater, which, a shorthand for that would be someone who's paid for their physical performance, right? High level athlete, even if it's not professional, but like a high level recreational athlete. But it's a lot less complex at that stage, right? It's still, you're doing more complex tasks, but it's probably like tracking your intake in some way, whether that's via hand portions or you're tracking macros. So the level three population is probably, 0.1%
Yeah. Yeah.
of the population. Level two, you're probably talking, 5 to maybe 10% of the population. But most people who live there are fitness professionals
Hmm.
because it's just what we love to do, right? Whereas the vast majority of the population are what we would consider a level one eater, where you are working on fundamental or essential nutrition behaviors. Right? We look at, we talk about tracking macros or timing this or, doing this particular diet or intermittent fasting or create all these external rules when we know that most North Americans in particular don't do, it's like, what are the statistics? 3 to 5% of North Americans complete like 4 essential behaviors: don't smoke, maintain a healthy weight, eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables, and get the recommended amount of exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not hitting those key pillars, and we're worried about what supplements we're taking, what timing of nutrients are occurring. Right, less than 10% of the population just gets 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day.
Why do you think they want such complexity? Is
Well,
that
I think there's a whole host of reasons. I think, you're seeing, you have Instagram influencers, social media in particular. You see all these really fit people doing all of these really intense things. And the logical assumption is it requires doing all of these really intense things just for me to, get fitter and healthier and leaner than I am now. Those intense things are required to get insanely fit. They're not required to make the first steps, right, on that progression. So I think that's part of it. I think fitness professionals unfortunately play into it a little bit, not intentionally, but that's how we eat. So I'm going to get, therefore, right, like I said earlier, you go back and you apply that to your clients, not remembering that you didn't start there, right? You're there now. But when you first started, it was, all right, I just need to eat some more protein. I need to eat more veggies, right? Maybe manage my stress, get a little more sleep, get a regular fitness routine. Man, you hit those boxes, you've now just moved the needle dramatically, right? If you're consistently doing some fundamental things, you're going to, it's the Pareto principle, right? 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts.
I remember one of the things that helped me so much when I was coaching back in the day, I used to just say, just make 2 better decisions a day. And I can't tell you how many people it just woke them up. Like, there was horrible advice when it comes to science, but it just woke them up to saying, oh, what am I actually putting into my mouth? Or am I falling asleep? Or what am I doing before I go to bed? Am I walking outside in the sun? It's I think that's such a key point that you make. That, number one, I think it's hilarious that the fitness professional is on level 2. I bet you have so many people that are like, oh, it's just not to level 3 yet. I can't. But that's a
right. It's not an actual progression. It's different needs for different scenarios.
I know. That's so good, though. Okay, so we kind of hit on a couple of, like, you mentioned macros, you mentioned keto. Why are those things so popular, or what is kind of the genesis of that popularity, do you think?
I think there's several reasons. I mean, one, external rules feel good. I can outsource the decision making to something else, right? Oh, I don't have to decide if I'm eating carbs at this meal because I'm eating keto and I just don't eat carbs, right? So you're outsourcing some decision making. I equate it to, like, President Obama used to talk about, like, wearing the same suit every single day. So you didn't have to, it was one less thing he had to decide. It's the same kind of idea, right? You're limiting your choices, and you foist those decisions on just some external rules that you get to follow. So it makes food choices easier, at least temporarily, right? And you look at the research on keto, and the vast majority of people who try it in the research slowly end up adding more carbs, right? And shifting towards something like, it's funny, you look at these long-term, like, low carb and low fat studies, and by the end, both groups are actually eating pretty similarly, because people tend to regress to the mean a little bit. It's not that they can't work, but I think there's a desire for, or an enjoyment of, having those decisions made for you, right? Hey, I can just follow these rules and it'll work. And it does. But then what happens when you don't want to follow the rules anymore, right? You haven't built intuitive eating skills. You haven't built other skills in place that allow you to then transfer to a more sustainable eating practice if you can no longer follow eating keto, or you no longer want to, or you no longer want to track your macros, right? I mean, tracking macros works. I don't think anybody denies that it works, but we also know that it's associated with some disordered eating behaviors, right? Cognitive dietary restraint, dichotomous thinking, like things are good or things are bad, or I'm good or I'm bad. I was good this weekend. Oh, I was bad this weekend, right? I didn't hit my macros. We see a lot of that anecdotally, and there's some emerging research showing that that's the case, right? It's not just anecdotal evidence or experience at this point. There's some emerging evidence that religiously tracking your food intake is just another form of disordered eating. So it's useful if it's used as, like, training wheels, right? Hey, help someone become more aware of their intake. Wow, I didn't realize that, every margarita I drank was 450 calories, right? That's often eye-opening for people. but that's where it's most useful as a tool for most people, where you become more aware, and then you can, as you use that external evidence to then help you make better choices, they're training wheels. And then you hopefully can take off those training wheels and graduate to paying more attention to internal cues, because now you're more consistently making better choices. You're eating more whole foods. You're getting plenty of protein and vegetables at meals, and quality carbs and or healthy fats. But when you only live by the numbers, like, that's not how most people want to eat. It's not how I'd want to eat, right? It's certainly not how my wife or my mom or my neighbor is going to want to eat, right? People don't want to do math to eat food.
It's interesting. I've found a lot of people, nutrition or other aspects around fitness, and when they start saying I am this as opposed to I'm doing this, a lot of things change. And I wonder if that's been beneficial for people to just say, oh, I'm keto. And so all of a sudden the mental shift just instantly happens where, oh, I don't eat that stuff because I'm keto, as compared to, oh, I got to do this diet that I don't really understand. It's too complex. It's like, but the second that you place that thing, it's like, oh, I'm keto. Now you're part of a group. Now you've got camaraderie. I wonder if that's part of it. I mean, yeah, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, that's a big thing we talk about in our level 2 coaching certification program, is looking at people's identities and values and priorities. And if you identify as I'm a mom, I'm keto, I'm X, Y, or Z, that absolutely changes your behaviors, but for better and for worse, right? There are always trade-offs. So if you're deciding, same thing as a coach, like if you decide, I'm a keto coach, well, now you've really limited your toolbox, right? What happens when keto falls out of popularity? It'll still always be around. It's been around long before it was popular now, right? So most things, intermittent fasting is not new. We just have slightly new ways of doing it. People have been fasting for thousands of years in various forms. So most dietary approaches are not new, right? New doesn't exist when it comes to food. Humans have been eating and experimenting with food for forever. There's just new packaging of it or new ways of thinking about it. But it's always a trade-off when you identify as I'm keto, I'm a CrossFitter, as opposed to I do these things, right? But when you identify as those things, you end up becoming blind to potential consequences, right? Like, hey, if I do too much CrossFit, or if I'm too strict in my keto, or I'm keto, but I'm having all kinds of consequences from it, because it's not for everybody, right? Like, oh, I'm having hormonal disruption, or I'm not sleeping well. Well, I can't change that because I'm keto. So it has to be something else, right? But that's what ends up. So it's good and bad. It helps it make you more consistent at it, but it'll also make you, because of that tribalism, because of that, it's now part of my identity, it's harder to change it. So it's right. There are trade-offs and everything like that.
Yeah, and the emotion behind that gets really intense sometimes, where I've seen folks that really struggle to get out of something like that, and they even know that they're basically burning their system down to the ground. So
it's not intellectual, right? You're not
exactly. It's system one thinking, right? Like, it's just subconscious at some point when you get into that tribal mentality. So if you're thinking about some of the behaviors that let's just call it successful people implementing I want to call it the right thing, like a nutrition protocol, so not necessarily a diet or something, but what are some of the generalized behaviors that you see lead to longer term success with people implementing and continuously improving?
Well, I think there's couple things or several things, right? It's about the food, but it's about a lot more than the food, right? People don't make food choices in a vacuum. I think of all the things that you do that are built around food. Oh, I'm getting together with family. We're having a meal together, right? I'm going out with friends. We're going to get a drink, or we're going to get food together. We're going, my kid, we had a successful baseball season. We're going to have an ice cream party. Like, so many of our emotional moments in life are built around food. So it's recognizing, and food is used for all kinds of other things, right? So I think at PN, what we try to really emphasize is, we talk about deep health a lot, right? Which there's like 6 phases of it, or 6 components, which is physical, existential, relational, right? Environmental, social, all that jazz. But when you're not paying attention to those elements and how they all impact your nutritional choices and how they all impact your overall health and well-being, when you're just focusing on the food, you're not going to actually solve the underlying, I don't want to say problems, maybe that's not the
Sure.
right word, but you're not helping yourself overcome some of these other challenges that then impact your food choices, right? One of the things we teach our fitness professionals as coaches is to realize there's like a saying in counseling that all human behavior is an attempt to solve or cope with a problem. Right? When you start looking at human behavior through that lens, it was like mind-blowing for me as a coach, right? Because I looked at everything. I was a dietitian. I did all my training as an engineer, right, which was very like logical problem solving.
Yeah.
And then I went over to nutrition, and did my didactic program, and even as an RD, and so much of it is focused on the food. So you're looking at, okay, well, it's because you're not eating enough protein, and you're not doing this, and you're not taking a bigger picture and looking, well, why? Like, why are they doing these things? Why are they having 3 glasses of wine and a bowl of ice cream at night? Right? It's just saying, hey, you really should cut out that wine and ice cream. Like, well, no shit. Like, who doesn't know
right.
that that's not good for their health? Like, they're well aware of that, but there's a reason why they're making that choice, right? And so what's going to really help people is focusing on like the bigger picture of why they're making the choices that they're making. So we do this through a couple ways. One is just to notice and name things, that when you find yourself automatically doing these behaviors, pouring yourself a 3rd glass of wine, right, having that bowl of ice cream before bed, ask yourself why. Like, notice, name, oh, it's because I was stressed. When you start to recognize it's because it's helping me cope with pain, shame, guilt, fear, stress, right, whatever the case might be, you can now like intercept those automatic behaviors, right, and break that chain where it just happens on autopilot. And next thing you know, you're eating the whole bottom of a bag of potato chips, and you're like, how did that happen, right?
Yep.
Where it's just autopilot. So I know it's a long-winded answer to your question, but so much of it comes down to behavioral elements as opposed to purely food. Now, food is a part of it, of course. Like, that's my area of expertise, right? So obviously, there are things we do nutritionally, like emphasizing plenty of protein, right? It's very satiating, keeps you full, helps you eat less without even feeling more full. Getting plenty of vegetables in your diet, same kind of idea. It helps you feel fuller during meals, whereas protein helps you feel full between meals. Those are the 2 key components there, right? Mm-hmm. Making sure if you're eating carbs, that they're quality sources, so whole grains, starchy tubers like sweet potatoes and potatoes, fruit, beans and legumes, right? Healthy fats, olive oil, avocado, nuts, seeds, right? So making sure most of your food intake is from minimally processed whole foods. Those are key components. The people who do, in my experience, who change their nutrition successfully, marry those 2 things. They recognize, okay, I need to make better food choices, but it's not just these arbitrary, I'm just going to follow these external rules for a period of time, right? Like, you do a 30-day whole food diet, and yeah, you can do it. But what happens when you lose your job, a shitty day happens, right? And now you turn to these things that were helping you cope previously, because they're not immediately harmful, right? They're actually immediately helpful. Oh, this 3rd glass of wine makes me feel great. I'm relaxed. It's a temporarily good solution to the problem. It's just a crappy long-term solution to the problem. Right? So it's making better food choices, but also recognizing what are the things that cause me to make those poor decisions in the first place, and how can I do those things differently?
I think that you and everybody in PN, I think that we see things very similarly, in that where if you can't actually lower the stress on a long-term basis and create daily habits that people want to do, it's always going to be too stressful to try to implement this external game plan, because it's not you, or it's too challenging, and people never stay with that stuff. And I think that exactly, I think that if it's like, how do we market that? Because
it's not pithy, right? It's not a catchy, right?
Yeah, it's like, how do I get fit in 15 minutes? I mean, that's I can't help you there. I can certainly help you make some better decisions, but I don't. It doesn't matter what the program is, what the nutrition plan is. They have to adopt it with a level of low stress, And I think, to your earlier point, that's why compounding from where they are is so important. It's like, if you're a level -3, we got to get you to level -2.5,
exactly.
And so it's such a good comment. So if this is a tough question, if you were to try and put your process with the client into a verbal infographic, right? Like, how would you describe that coaching process, not in 4 hours?
I think the best word would be iterative,
Mm.
right? Like, we're going to try some stuff, we're going to work on it together, and then we're going to see what happens. And then we're going to continually iterate based on what's actually happening, not on what I think should be happening, not on what the research says this should do, right? We're going to look at true outcomes. How did this work for you and why, right? And if it didn't work, well, why not? Like, what seemed to be standing in your way? Or oftentimes it's, wow, it worked really well in these 3 days, but not so well in these 4 days. What was different about those 3 days, right? Let's find where and when it was successful, and how can we replicate more of that, right? So I think being solutions focused, maybe this isn't a great infographic answer now that I
No,
get
it's
rolling,
good. It's great.
right? I'd say it's solutions focused, it's iterative, and I'm using a paradigm of what I would call like evidence-based practice, where we look at, what does the research say? How can we combine that with my experience, as well as with your preferences, values, and goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can make it applicable to you in your real, messy, everyday life.
I think, gosh, it just comes back to truly templating things can never be the longest term solution for people who want to continue to make progress, I think. And obviously you and I believe that, and our audiences generally believe that. And so we're preaching to the choir, but I think it's worth saying that, right? Like, if you're going to actually be iterative until AI is smarter than all human beings, and it can teach itself how to do all this stuff, you can't just give somebody a program that just resets and goes again and goes again and goes again. It's because people change and their situations change and their stress levels change.
Mm-hmm.
That was really well said. I think I was trying to like create, an acronym as you were walking through it. I didn't quite get there, but so let me kind of move into a little bit of a different realm. We got a lot of people who love the fitness for sport or fitness for competition setting around here. What are some of the things, and if you could start where you would start if you didn't have a big background on somebody, what are some of the things that you look for when an athlete comes to you and says, hey, I really want to push the envelope, and then if possible in the fitness arena?
Mm-hmm. I mean, some of the big things I'm looking for are like, how's your performance right now? And then how's your recovery right now? Do you feel like, when you wake up in the morning, what's your energy level? What's your mood like? I mean, if I don't have a lot of baseline data, but if I need some immediate understanding of this person and where they're at, I want to know first and foremost, but actually probably what their recovery is like. What's their energy level like on a daily basis? Right? What's their mood like? That's going to tell me so much about how they're handling their training load, right? And then how well they're eating to handle that training load, as well as managing stress and sleep, right? Those are all big things that go into it. So when people want to perform at their best, oftentimes the first thing they think of is kicking ass in the gym, right? Training super hard, getting after it. But if you don't recover, you're not going to improve your performance well, right? So yes, you see that in extreme examples of like overtraining, but there are lesser versions of that I would just call like under recovering, right? Where it's not true overtraining where you feel like where your body's like literally not functioning well. It's just you are not getting enough sleep, and you're not getting enough important nutrients, in particular protein and usually carbohydrates, depending on what your training looks like, to help you recover and fuel your next performance, right? You're not replenishing things, you're not in a positive nitrogen balance, right, or a positive protein balance, right? You're depleting your glycogen stores or your intramuscular triglyceride stores. You're just not actually recovering enough. So the first thing I'm probably looking for would just be to ask some of those kind of questions. Your recovery, how's your sleep? What's your energy level feel like? What's your mood? Just trying to get a good sense of how well their body is functioning, how well they're recovering from their current training load. Obviously, we'll talk about training, and then we'll gather some food intake information. Hey, what's your eating look like? I don't need the world's greatest 3-day food log. I want a general sense to start at least. What does your food intake look like? Tell me about what you like to eat, right? And how you're thinking about it. Because oftentimes you'll hear people say, oh, well, I'm doing low carb, right? And they're doing really intense and lots of training. in my experience, that often doesn't end well, right? Because you're doing training that demands a lot of carbohydrates.
Yep.
So those are the things I'm probably looking at without having all kinds of other background data. But out of the gate, those are just simple key questions. I start with, again, if you go back to like making nutrition complex or not, what are the simplest things I can understand about this person to help them perform and fuel better, recover better? And then we'll only make it more complex as we need to if simpler strategies are not getting the job done.
After you've done that intake and some assessment and gotten a little bit to know the person, do you often look to get to certain places, i.e., I want you at X number of grams of protein or carbohydrates, or do you really keep coming back to the notion of how are you performing and how are you feeling? Would
A bit
you,
of both.
okay.
Yeah, so we're definitely, I don't too often. I mean, fitness enthusiasts, more likely to have them track macros. If I'm working with athletes, far less likely, because if you've ever worked with high-level athletes, it's just not on their radar, right? They eat like regular people half the time, just a little bit more. So getting them to like log in and track their intake like that, in my experience, just doesn't end well. I remember in particular when I was working with the Browns for a couple of years, like several of the players didn't even own computers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep,
Like I was
yep.
like, well, because I had sent them like some stuff to fill out, and like, oh man, how am I going to fill this? I don't own a computer, and I was just like, what? Like, you were just in college, man. How is that even possible?
Yeah.
I don't want the answer to that question, actually. They've probably got some assistance in their schooling. So, it's oftentimes what I often have them do. Now we'll put together a plan, and I use the hand portions, even with a lot of athletes, because it'll track calories and macros for them without them having to do a lot of counting, right? Or inputting stuff into an app or looking at nutrition labels. Now, if they're into that kind of thing, like most fitness enthusiasts are into that stuff, we'll do more tracking because they feel empowered by it. They enjoy doing it. If I have an athlete who's not interested in those things, like, okay, what can we do that's doable within their real life, right? That'll still help them achieve the majority of that. Right, so we'll do hand portions, palms for protein, fists for vegetables, cupped handfuls for carbs, and thumbs for fats. Right, we'll come up with a target number for the day they're trying to hit and usually give them some per meal recommendations to help make that a reality. And then maybe we'll put together like a little bit of a template almost for them. Hey, these are some meals you like to eat. Here's how this would translate into hand portions, right? Here's what a couple of days might look like, just to turn those into actual meals. And they start to get the hang of it. And that'll do most of the macro math for them. And then we see, okay, now how is this actually working for you? What does your performance look like? Or what's your recovery look like? What is your sleep and your energy and your mood? And if those two things aren't correlating, hey, I'm doing this pretty consistently, but my outcomes suck. Okay, well, now we need to adjust. Right? Why might that be? I'm not doing as consistently as I thought, or maybe this actually, you're losing weight. Maybe this isn't enough calories. We need more carbs. We need more fats. Maybe we need more protein, right? Usually protein for athletes, we can get that pretty solid. In my experience, they usually need more carbs because everyone loves fat. Man, fat's delicious, right? You can add avocado to things, and have a little dark chocolate. You have cooking some butter. It's so easy for fats to add up. And you look in the research literature, and it's the same thing. You'll often see athletes will meet their calorie needs, but they'll undereat their carb needs and overeat their fat needs a little bit. And I see that same thing in my own practice.
Yeah, man, it's so well said. And I appreciate you keeping it on a level that I can understand and engage with too, because I'm sure you could get way out of my league really quickly. I think let's kind of call it on the educational side there. If you were to leave a coach with some guidelines as to where you would want them to start thinking about nutrition or continue to think about nutrition, what are some things that you would want them to think about?
Yeah, I mean, just in general.
Yeah.
So for coaches, I mean, I want coaches to think about nutrition on a continuum. And you hit a great line earlier. We talked about like meeting clients where they're at, right? So if a client is currently, use the same language you used before, right? If a client is currently a -3, right? Don't coach them at like level 2. But you're not going to coach all your clients the same. So if you have a client who is a level 2, we'll coach them like a level 2. But if you have a client who's a -3, man, you're just trying to look at things on a continuum. How can we help them be a little bit better, right? I love that framework you used of make 2 better decisions every day. Right? It's not about overhauling everything all at once. Right? What you often see coaches do, they see someone's food log and their lifestyle, and they're like, "Oh my God, I got to fix everything." Like, no, all you need to do is make one thing better today, and then one thing better the next week, and the next week, and the next thing you know, 50 things are better, and they're kicking ass and taking names and feeling awesome. So it's about how can you help clients make progress by viewing things on a continuum and look for, like, have a hierarchy of big rock items. Oftentimes I'll see, people will have like their, I don't want to say pet things, but they'll have particular things that they're passionate about. Like, I really don't like people eating too many artificial sweeteners. I'll just use that as an example. Look at someone's intake and they have 2 Diet Cokes today. And they're like, we should really cut out the diet soda, when they're living on fast food and not getting enough sleep and drinking too much. Like, that is not your top concern, right?
Yep.
That is like the last thing on the totem pole when their goal is to lose weight, right? So it's having a hierarchy. What are the most important things I'm looking for, right? Getting enough protein, getting enough veggies, eating more whole foods, managing stress, getting enough sleep, and improving their mindset, where you talk about the notice and name and breaking the chain, looking at the behavioral elements. So it's have that hierarchy and view things on a continuum, right? Not everyone's going to be eating purely organic, grass-fed, X, Y, and Z, right? If they're currently eating a lot of fast food, how can we just get them eating, even if it's not organic or grass-fed, but it's chicken bought from the store? It's a step in the right direction.
Big win.
How can we make those changes, right, that are going to move the needle, that are doable within the context of their life, right? Oftentimes, because it can be sticker shock if you're currently eating one thing, and it's, I got to go to Whole Foods to buy my meat now. It's like, holy shit, that's $12 a pound.
Yeah.
Right? Even if they can afford it, oftentimes it's just like, well, I'm not paying that.
Yeah.
I think of people I know, family members who changing their eating habits, like they've been buying these certain things for decades. Right. And so they have an idea of how much they cost, or they'll constantly change where they get things. I saw it in the paper, it's $2.99 a pound over here. Right. So if you're asking them to suddenly buy something that's $7.59 a pound or whatever, that's only going to move the needle a little bit. Right. Going from regular chicken to organic chicken is probably better for the environment. It's likely better for them, but it's not going to make a dramatic change to their body composition. So if their goal is first and foremost to change their body composition, focus on the things that'll move that needle. And then we can start having other conversations about long-term health or environmental sustainability or what have you, right? But don't conflate those two things.
I've seen a lot of coaches be very close-minded, actually, when it comes to these ideas, where you're saying, look at the client and ask yourself what's going to benefit the client the most, which I think is completely logical, from a principled standpoint. But you made such a good statement where so many coaches they have their fallbacks, right? Like, well, they're the keto guy or they're the no Diet Coke guy. And I think if coaches could look at this and say, okay, well, how do I kind of just take my blinders off and ask the question, where are you? That just changes their entire outlook on how they approach the program. I mean, James Fitzgerald, who's our founder, would often say, you got to be a bit of a chameleon. You have to be able to have a conversation with somebody wherever they are. Totally. And you have to say it in a way that they can hear you based on where they are. I think that was so well said. So here's kind of a last question for you. What was the hardest team, and you don't have to say a specific team, or like what was the hardest sport that you found to get people on board for?
Probably, well, this might be because of the teams I worked with as opposed to, I'm not sure. I would say professional football, okay, because so much of their guidance as they progress is about getting bigger, getting stronger, getting heavier, like just eat. And then they get to the professional level and it's not just about being the biggest, strongest guy anymore. Like the game is so fast, like you've got to, all that weight has to be doing something for you, right? Oftentimes, those guys are the best in spite of their eating habits, right? Not because of their eating habits. So, I mean, it's been a pretty similar experience across sports, in terms of guys have just been able to get away with it. Usually the younger guys, older guys who are still in the league have usually figured it out because it's one of the ways that helps them stay in the league, right? I worked with the Spurs, and you had the Manu Ginobilis and the Tim Duncans of the world who, they ate fantastic intakes. Manu Ginobili had more questions than any human I think I've ever interacted with. But it was fantastic because it was just curious, and he wanted to stay in the league and keep his play at the highest level possible. And high level nutrition was one of the ways that he did it. And you look at Tom Brady, you look at so many of these examples. I'm a Patriots fan, lifelong, but I have qualms with Tom Brady's, recommendations. But the point is, he cares about his nutrition, right? And he implements it consistently, day after day after day. And so the guys that are older, that stay in the league, have matured. They recognize that it's valuable. Younger guys, regardless of league, I would say, regardless of what sport I've worked in, oftentimes they were young. They've been able to eat whatever, and they just trained so much that they're able to still be the best. But when you get to the highest level, that ceases to be the case for most, right? There are the rare exceptions, right? The Randy Mosses of the world, the guys that are just the freaks of the freaks. Not that I saw how Randy Moss ate, but in my experience, I'd say it's a pretty even split, though football might take the cake.
And I was a tennis player in college. You mentioned Manu Ginobili. I just saw him at the U.S. Open. I know you work with Sloane Stephens. How were tennis players?
Actually, tennis players are not so great, not so great either. But what's really interesting, working with Sloane was a really fun experience because she had very particular tastes, right? So we had a chef come down, we did all these taste testing and find combinations that worked for her and that she liked. But like most people, when we first put together the plan, I used hand portions with her, right? Because we can make this doable in everyday life. She can look at a palm of chicken or a palm of fish if she's at a tournament or her mom's cooking or whatever at a restaurant, rather than trying to track. She wasn't going to track macros. She wasn't going to do some of those things. But we get to put together a plan, and it was like, wow, that's way too much food. It was actually more volume of food than she was used to eating, but it was actually fewer calories, right? Because we took out a lot of the juice, we took out a lot of the fried food, not all of it, because that was going to be impossible to go from a fair amount to zero, but we progressively took it down. But it was like, man, I don't know if I can eat this much. But it was really just a mental block, right? Like it seemed like more volume of food, and isn't this going to make me gain weight, or isn't it? Because oftentimes in my experience, I've worked with weight class athletes who actually might be the most challenging, like boxers and MMA guys, where it's like, they'll often think of the weight of the food as opposed to its caloric intake. Not everybody, obviously, I'm generalizing significantly, but it's really interesting working with athletes and the things that come up as objections that you wouldn't even think of as a possible objection. Because they think differently about their bodies and how they function, especially for like weight class athletes, and they got to be really specific weights, so they're thinking about certain things. Or, right, there are just different elements of sports. But for tennis, once Sloane got doing those things and implementing them, and we tried it as an experiment. Let's just try this for a couple of weeks, see how it goes. She was like, cool. And then she started doing it. She was feeling better. She was recovering better, right? She actually trimmed down a little bit, which had been one of her goals way back in the beginning, and was like, she was blown away that eating more food didn't mean, right, gaining more weight. Because for most people, more food means more calories, when that wasn't actually the case.
I love that with each additional sport you tacked on, you're like, maybe they're the worst.
The worst is a harsh way of putting it, right? But athletes pose, in many ways, a lot of similar challenges to like regular people, right? They don't have extra special nutrition education. If they do, it's usually in small snippets, right? At like a seminar they're forced to attend for for their sport team, and they're only half paying attention because they have to be there. And it's like, bro, I don't want to be doing this. So, they may get a little extra nutrition stuff, and they're given some supplements, or they're given a little bit of stuff in college or what have you. But on the grand scheme of things, they're regular people who are just really good at playing sports.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's not always viewed that way. We expect, they're professional athletes. They must be, eating awesome and have the best everything. And that's true oftentimes when they've been doing it a long time. But when they're first progressing up, or they're just getting into the professional ranks, that's usually not the case. They haven't had the financial stability in a lot of cases. They were students, or they were young athletes who weren't making the food decisions, their parents were. So oftentimes, right, we think, oh, a 23-year-old athlete still must be eating great. But oftentimes they're like any other 23-year-old who has no cooking skills, has never never made food, not done much shopping, lived on a college campus and ate at all the college eateries, but didn't have to make all their own food. So it's they're just like regular people. They're just good at a sport.
Oh, so well said. Brian, thanks so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed it. And best of luck to you and to PN. I know that you guys are launching the new level 1 right now, so best of luck there. People are pretty excited for it. We're going to be a part of it as well. So looking forward to it, and appreciate you coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jim. This was great.